Hi, my name is Giacomo Tognini, and I'm a staff writer on the wealth team here at Forbes. Today I'm here with my colleague Matt Duro. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Giacomo.
And we're here to talk about our recent investigation on the Schuler Education Foundation. So to get started, Matt, let's talk a bit about the foundation and sort of how we learned about the story in the first place.
Sure. So Giacomo had actually written a story about Jack Schuler, the founder of the foundation, a few years back. I think it was early 2021. He joined our Billionaires list for the first time, thanks to, so basically he was nearly 30 years ago the former president of Abbott Laboratories, a healthcare giant, and after being fired from there, sort of reinvented himself as a pharmaceutical and healthcare investor. Over 3 decades or so, he did well enough investing healthcare stocks to make our Billionaires list for the first time. So that is sort of how we became acquainted with him at the very beginning. And as a part of Giacomo's story, around that time, his foundation had made a big announcement, a big pledge to spend $500 million over about a decade, convincing colleges to enroll more undocumented students, which was sort of a continuation of the work that his foundation had been doing, which maybe you can speak to a little bit more.
Yes, and so one of the things that I talked with Jack Schuler about back in 2021 was his foundation, the Schuler Education Foundation, which he started in 2001. And when we spoke, it was when we added him to the Billionaires list with a net worth of $1.1 billion, largely from investments in a lot of healthcare stocks, which had obviously been on a tear in 2021 due to COVID. His largest holding was Quidel, which is a company that was one of the first to gain FDA approval for its COVID tests. And at the time, he'd made this big announcement, the $500 million pledge, like you said. But also he had this foundation, which for, at that point, 2 decades, had a program called the Schuler Scholar Program, which partnered with schools in the Chicago and Milwaukee areas. They provided tutoring and counseling to, at that point, I think it was more than 1,500 kids over the course of those 20 years, and helped them gain access to colleges. And a lot of these kids were first generation, low income, sort of underserved kids from underserved communities that they were able to help. And then what happened in the ensuing years up to this year is that a lot of those stock bets, right, that at the time had been so successful, really, really went south. And that's sort of right when you heard about the issues the foundation was having.
Sure. Yeah, so the Schuler Foundation, as well as Jack, are based in Chicago. I'm from Chicago, and we had sort of heard through the grapevine that the foundation was sort of shutting down abruptly. And I knew that Giacomo had written about Schuler, previously, and so that's when we sort of decided to put our heads together. And I guess the big part of it was, the good thing about it being a nonprofit is that it's got, publicly available tax returns for the last 20 or so years. So we spent a lot of time, going through those to figure out sort of what happened as best as we could, and then a lot of, both current and former employees were eager to kind of, help us fill in the gaps, I would say, given just sort of how shocking this has been for them. And yeah, I think, sort of based on a combination of those things, we were able to sort of piece together that picture, which was really that, a lot of those same stocks, as Giacomo was saying, that made, Schuler so rich at one point, which have now, sort of cratered, for lack of a better word, were the same stocks that he was, investing the foundation's money in. So kind of his foundation's trajectory, I guess, sort of mirrored his in that, sort of at least from our perspective, he kind of came out of nowhere and burst onto the billionaire scene in early 2021 and then dropped off shortly thereafter. Likewise, the foundation's assets ballooned around that same time, and, enough so that they wanted to make this grand, $500 million pledge. And, since then, their assets have really plummeted. So yeah, I mean, I think I sort of alluded to it a little bit, but I was struck by, the reactions of some of the, I guess, both the students, current informer that we spoke to, as well as, employees, current informer that we spoke to. But yeah, what sort of reaction did you sense from them about, as it relates to all this?
Yeah, I think like you said, it was shock, right? Because if you look at, in 2021, we estimated his net worth at around 1.1 billion. Now I think we estimate around 200 million. The spokesperson for him said that was too high, but wouldn't provide sort of more detailed information on it. And then, like you said, looking, when we were looking at, these 990s, right, the annual tax filings, securities filings, all this data, and we could see the foundation's assets rocket above 200 million at one point during 2021, or before that, around 2020. And then now, as of the last filing in 2022, come way down. And those liabilities come up as well, right? So that was sort of what we saw in the numbers. And then talking to all the people we spoke to about 12 people, right? Former and current employees, and students. And beyond the feeling of sort of shock, right? Because the way that they found out was March 21st, there was a Zoom call for all the employees of the foundation, where we were told that they had to, click on a message saying that they wouldn't record the call, and then they were told, the foundation's winding down by end of May, and then by the end of August, the sort of very small number of staff, 7 staff that would stay on past May, would be gone at the end of August. And then the next day, there was this email that we also saw that was sent out to the 16 schools the foundation partners with, telling them this information. And that was the Friday before spring break. Mm-hmm. So sort of a very, it was a time where a lot of these students, the schools didn't have much time to sort of react to that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the reactions we got, I think, were sort of disbelief, right? That how could this institution that had been working there in these communities for more than 20 years at this point, not all of a sudden, right, because there had been signs in the last year of them starting to cut costs and cut programs, but within a year, and then so quickly over the last few weeks and months, basically come to an end, right? Mm-hmm. When they were under the impression that this was going to be going on for the long haul, right? Mm-hmm. Because Schuler had signed the Giving Pledge in 2021, which is a movement of philanthropists that was started by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, Melinda French Gates, where people basically pledge to give more than half or more of their wealth away before they die. And Schuler had said he really wanted to give nearly all of his wealth, and he reiterated that to us through a spokesperson recently. And then to sort of square that with what was going on was very tough for a lot of these people we spoke to accept. And, what was sort of what did you take from the conversations you had with the people we spoke to, and then everything that you and I saw in those documents?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because I felt like collectively, us and them, whether it be the former students, current students, former or current employees, we were sort of helping each other piece it together because I think they'd been given sort of a partial explanation of what had happened and what was going on, not just, very recently when the big announcement was made, but, over the last year or so when you were alluding to them making some like intermittent steps that might suggest that there was some financial hardship, like hiring freezes or whatever it might be. And they, both in this most recent email that they sent out to the students, the schools, the families, basically pointed to the stock market, its downturn, and then, interestingly, I think one of the most interesting things from my perspective that we saw was that an email from the foundation's former executive director was shared with us from, I think it was around September 2022.
Right.
And it really, provided maybe the best insight I think we could get into the thought process without, the leaders of the foundation actually telling us what the thought process was as to why, they had so much of their money, concentrated in a small number of stocks that had been wildly fluctuating, and why at no point they, decided to diversify their assets. And basically, what the guy said was, if we sell now and these stocks are, historically undervalued, which is sort of an interesting term because relative to what, like their crazy, peaks when they were booming, I guess. But the thought process was, if we sell now, we're going to miss out on the rebound, and we're not going to be able to help as many people in the future. And of course, that rebound never came. But yeah, I think what I was trying to say was, like, yeah, they'd been told it was the stock market, but like, on its face, like that explanation doesn't really make sense right now because the stock market's, sort of booming as we speak. So it was the fact that like they were concentrated in such a small number of highly speculative stocks that ultimately proved to be their undoing. So I think that was something that, and we've heard, after publishing our reporting, that really surprised the folks at the foundation that we spoke with. They weren't aware of, even though it was out there publicly for the most part in these tax returns, but like, who looks at that? Like, if we weren't reporting this story, I wouldn't have been looking at that either.
Right.
But yeah, that was, I think us able to like expand a little bit on the partial explanation that they got.
And then the impact we've also seen on that big initiative you'd announced back in 2021, right, is that we reached out to all 10 schools that were in it. And so the impact hasn't just been on the foundation shutting down and the impact on the kids in high school that were part of this program, but also that initiative that he made back in 2021, the $500 million, and 8 of the 10 schools, right, told us that the foundation had suspended payments. And so we don't know how much of that was actually given out because there was sort of incomplete information in the tax filings we saw, and also we didn't get a sort of complete answer on how much had been paid out. But that's sort of another casualty, right? The main impact is we have, the foundation is going to honor scholarships for kids who are currently in college, and for partial scholarships for freshmen and sophomores, and then the other scholarships for juniors and seniors. But then beyond the fact that they're not going to get the tutoring and the counseling that made it also effective in the last 20 years, and it's not obviously going to accept more kids in the future, we also have this big initiative that sort of kind of put him on the map for us back in 2021. That's also effectively been canceled. The foundation told us that it hasn't been canceled, that they plan on trying to allocate more resources to it, but we've been told also by the universities that the payments have been suspended, and that also paints a picture of the impact that all of this is having, right?
Yeah.
Not just not only in the Chicago and Milwaukee areas where these students are that are in the program, but also more broadly on the bigger impact that Schuler wanted to have.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, one of the things that I had to like figure out in reporting this was when I went in, I assumed that like what Schuler must be doing, because it was like an educational nonprofit that helps send kids to college, was they must be giving massive college scholarships. And then you like look at the size of these scholarships relative to the cost of, tuition at these schools they're sending them to, which are, top tier schools, and you're like kind of scratch your head, and it's like $10,000 over 4 years. Like, okay, like that can't be all they're doing. And came to understand that, the scholarships, which is, the one thing that they are, the one big thing, I guess, going to be able to honor going forward were such a small piece of what the foundation did, because so much of it was preparing these kids who do not come from schools that have the same resources that a lot of us were fortunate enough to have, or weren't able to rely on parents who had been through the college admissions application process before. So much of what the foundation was doing was getting the kids to the stage where these schools would then say, okay, we'll pay for all or most of your tuition. So that to me was something that took me a little time to get my head around, and understand that, okay, even though they're honoring these $10,000 scholarships, which is what they promised, like, there is this huge impact. And so, yeah, I think that was, obviously the impact has been huge. Do you think we got a sense of, so they continued like up until very near the end, when things had already started to go south, I guess, like bringing new kids into the program. Do you feel like we ever got a good sense of like why that might have felt like a good idea to them, or no?
Yeah, I think what we found was also right. In last year, May and June, they accepted a new cohort of kids into the schools, into the program. And then over that time between then and March, when they announced they were winding down, we saw sort of several times where they decided to cut costs more. And honestly, I think this is the takeaway we both had, is that this was a situation where it gradually became clear to them that these stocks that they bet all of their assets were concentrated in were not going to bounce back. And even up to June of last year, they still wanted to keep this going in the long run and thought that they could. And then they kind of saw the writing on the wall and decided to wind it down after that. And that's, you really do wonder when you're reporting this, what if this had been diversified before? Or what if, I think there was one stock that invested in, Soleno Therapeutics, which had they sold, had they kept that stock, for example, because they sold some of it a couple of years ago, they actually would have had more money, right? Well, with other ones that they were more concentrated, and it was the opposite. And so really the takeaway I've had is that it's a story of this former billionaire investor who made a set of concentrated bets on these various companies that were working well for quite a while and then stopped and sort of went all in, right? Both personally and through his foundation. And then him and the other leadership of the foundation weren't able to change that strategy. And ultimately, despite all of the work that they did in the last 20 years that had a huge and real impact on these kids, many of which we spoke to, and also the staff that worked there, is now coming to an end by the end of August.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I agree, and it's a sad story where I don't think, obviously there are really no winners in the story. It's sad for everyone involved, including Jack, I would say, who I never was able to speak to, but I know you did. And, my impression, I don't think you spend 20 years and the amount of money that he did on a project like this if you don't really care about it. And, people who know Jack, obviously, a lot better than I do, or even you do, based on, the conversations you had with him, who spoke with us, sort of attributed all this to, him just not wanting to accept defeat when it came to these biotech or healthcare bets, and obviously that ended very badly. So yeah, I think it's a sad story, even for him.
It really is a sad story, seeing the impact it's had on these kids, even after all these years of really good work. But it was great reporting on the story with you, Matt, and getting to the bottom of what happened there. And thanks for being here with me today.
Yeah, thanks, Giacomo.
And you can read the story on Forbes.com. Thank you.